my name's Eileen Roden. As I said, I'll be leading you through this taster session this evening. I'm one of the directors of PMO Learning and also the lead author for the P3O certification, the manual. So as I often say when I do any kind of training, I'm not very kind of tied to one particular methodology. So even though I wrote the P3O book, I'm quite happy that there are lots of other PMO project management methodologies. And what I'm interested in is doing something that is useful for people who are running and working around PMOs. So I've been managing PMOs and also been working in PMOs and supporting other PMOs now for the last 32 years, which feels like an awful long time. So I'm not going to talk too much about me. You can find out more about me if you want to on the website. So we're going to be about an hour this evening, and the purpose, we've really just got a kind of a single purpose of tonight's session, is to give you a better understanding of how learning is undertaken within a virtual classroom. And we're going to use a snippet of the P3O certification course in order to do that. And we specifically call it a virtual classroom because it is translated from actually just being in a standard classroom. So we're going to take about what that means from a trainer's perspective, but we're also going to take what that means from a delegate perspective. So when you actually kind of sign on for some virtual learning and people talk about a virtual classroom, what you should be looking to expect. Now, one of the added benefits of actually kind of working online and in virtual, you get to pick up a whole load of new kind of tools around how to use the online tools. So one of the first things I'm going to ask you to do is find the annotation tools that are in Zoom. And I'd just like you to use the annotation tools and type against your name. So I've got everybody's name who is expected here. Fortunately, we didn't have anybody with a duplicate name. So I would just like you to find your annotation tools. Oh, wrong way, Eileen. And just type in where you're currently sitting. So I don't necessarily mean your lounge, but your town and your city and your country, so we can see where people are at. So if you get stuck, then let me know. If you kind of hover over your window, you should be able to find the annotation tool. There's text, and you should just be able to kind of place it. There's Kenneth Leighton Buzzard. If you're really good, you can change the color of your text. And I will be sitting here just to make sure everybody is kind of signed on. So Lindsay's overtaken the Sharon spot. It's fine. So AR's left. Oh no, AR, have you got your annotation tools there, AR? Katie, have you found your annotation tools?
More.
Not yet.
Right, then if you scroll over, if you run your cursor over your picture or over the screen, at the top there should be a little menu.
Yeah, I think I'm in.
So if you have a look at the view options, are you there? Is that you drawing?
I'm just trying to write.
Yeah, well, if you go on to, there's a text button.
Text, yeah, I've got it.
And you can actually then just kind of type that in. So AR, can you type in?
No, I didn't know how to get this text box.
Okay, if you have a look under the view button.
Okay.
There should be an annotate with a little pen. And if you click on the annotate, it brings up a sub-menu where you can click on text and then use your mouse to put that where you are. and type your location in. Shaz, have you managed to find it?
Yeah, I've done it.
Or have you just hit return? Because I don't think it appears until we hit return.
Mine didn't.
Can you
You're
see
not-
it now?
I can see lots of Lindsay and sunny Rochdale.
Let me just make it bigger.
She's gone for size. How are you getting on here? Are you still there, Eo? Trying to find it. So this is a really kind of, I always do this as a kind of a first off, because it's like being given a flip chart pen for the very first time. Yes. So this is often used when we go through the virtual classroom, because you wouldn't expect, if you went into a classroom, for the trainer to spend all day just kind of talking at you. So we do need to spend quite a bit of time. Oh, well done, Bissy. Got there from Milton Keynes. Excellent. It is actually, oh, Shada's in Bolton. No, you're not too far away from Lindsay and Melissa. It is about just kind of getting some kind of upskilling and actually kind of using the tools. And what we tend to find, the first couple of sessions in the morning tend to be quite slow until people kind of get the hang of the tools. I'm sure as the kind of the lockdown continues and more people are working from home, these tools have become a lot more common, and we're using Zoom, but this is a very kind of normal functionality that's in any other kind of conferencing tool. So this is just kind of some interaction. So while we're here, I just want to make sure, have you all got chat available as well? So you sometimes need to open the chat button, and you also have the opportunity to, and some of you have done this already, can put up a thumbs up or clap your hands, which are shown on your photograph. Have you found your emotions? I don't mean personally found your emotions, I mean your emotion key. There we go. So that's Ken's given me the thumbs up. Everybody else find the thumbs up? There's a few more. One of the reasons why we do that is when we're talking in normal conversation, we often kind of preempt somebody else finishing speaking, and we sometimes talk over people, not always in a rude way, just because we're excited and part of the conversation. When we're playing with technology, that tends to cause everybody kind of stops talking and nobody continues. So often what happens is when we're having a conversation and you want to join in, it's either worth starting to put something in chat or just kind of putting your hand up, so the person who's speaking knows that you want to contribute to the conversation. So I kind of keep an eye on that. It also comes up sometimes in my participant management button as well, so I can get you involved. So don't get upset now, but I'm just about to clear all of those drawings because we're going to move on to the next slide. So one of the important aspects, when we get there, is really understanding what we mean by learning within the virtual classroom. So if we're thinking about physical, who loves doing e-learning? Whose favourite mode of learning is e-learning? I'm not seeing any thumbs up or hands up, yes? Not everybody's favourite, because there's not a level of interaction. Yes, people actually like being physically in the same place as other people, because the learning, again, is not just about what the tutor says or what the trainer says at the front of the class. It's some of the conversations, and we tend to feel a little bit more relaxed, and kind of the real learning comes with a lot of the exercises. So we think about kind of some of the lectures that we've been through. Yes, we're learning things from the classroom, but we're not really having the opportunity to discuss it and talk about, well, how does that feel? Well, do you know, I've got an example. I want to have a conversation. That's not what you would have in a lecture theatre. So what we really like, And what most people like is a classroom situation where we get given some theory, we get given the opportunity then to go and do some exercises to put that into practice. We can have a conversation with other people who are around the classroom, not necessarily just the trainer, but we can get some expert input and we can talk around some of the nuances. So we tend to find the richest learning comes from classroom, where communication is easy because people there and we can kind of see each other. Now, what's happened in this whole kind of everybody kind of suddenly working from home, what we've seen is an increased number of webinars. And webinars are very much, I would argue, like the lecture theatre, where the delegates are there as a passive individual. And very often when we're doing a webinar, every now and again, the person who's leading the webinar will ask you to take part in a poll and expect you to kind of be able to respond in some way. But it's like saying in a lecture theatre, everybody put their hands up who's got a cup of tea. It's not the same as actually running a detailed exercise. When we're talking about doing a virtual classroom, what we're trying to do is replicate as much as possible the experience you would have in the classroom. So in terms of kind of keeping the chat going, and that happens as a trainer, you find that the delegates have conversations amongst themselves, they put their hand up and ask some questions to talk about some of the subjects. And interestingly, if you have a kind of look at the chat that's in there, is exactly the type of conversation you would have. Oh, pass the sweets round, and oh, can I see that highlighter pen, and oh, have you got a sticker that I can stick on my book? So what we want to try and encourage is all of that kind of casual conversation that adds to a feeling of being a group of learners rather than just a bunch of individuals who are sitting at the other end of the line, which again is one of the reasons why we limit the number of delegates we would have in a virtual classroom, and why we would also say that we need to have people's cameras on so we can actually kind of see people. Now, I recognize that there are people tonight who have decided to go off camera. If we were here and running, as I'm next week, I'm running a 5-day virtual course, one of the prerequisites is that you have to wear enough to kind of come on camera, because it just kind of gets that relationship going between the different groups. Now, if you're on a webinar or on a virtual classroom with people you know, it's less of an issue. But certainly on kind of some of the courses, if you have a look at kind of where we've got people from Morocco, we've got people from Riyadh, we've got people up from Macedonia and up and down the United Kingdom. These are people who we've never met before, and we know that building a relationship is much easier if we can see some of the kind of the physical and some of the kind of the non-verbal behaviours as we go through communication. So when we're going through a virtual classroom, we expect people to have their cameras on. And the other thing is that in a webinar, you can be completely passive. You know, you can sit there, and I've done it myself. I've signed up for a webinar and I've had it almost as a radio playing on in the background. So I'm sapping up, and every now and again I'll look at the screen and think, oh, that's quite useful, take a screenshot, but that's not actively learning. So when we're signing up for a virtual classroom, you're signing up to be there and conscious and attentive through the period of the training course, in the same way as you would do when you would turn up as a classroom. So my expectation of you as a delegate and your expectation of me should be exactly what we get from a classroom situation. So one of the things we're kind of very keen to do is make sure is that people actually understand kind of the house rules from a course. Now, what we would typically do is I come along with some standard house rules, which I'm going to take you through, but we need to make sure that we get some commitment from the delegates to those house rules. And the exercise I also ran this morning is I also asked the delegates about what house rules they would expect from other delegates on the course. Now, if we're sitting in a classroom, we've all had those delegates, the minute an exercise happens, they pick up their phone and they're out the room. So they don't actively get involved in the exercises. And again, we want to make sure that there is an expectation of the delegates who are on a virtual classroom that they contribute to all of the exercises. And also, it's not just me as the trainer who's saying to people, well, actually, can you make sure you get involved? It's actually incumbent upon us all to hold each other accountable to actually kind of behave appropriately in the classroom. And again, what we've been talking about kind of and given some kind of hints and tips, not just to the delegates, but also to the trainers. And it's good practice. If you read any kind of textbook on any kind of meeting management, you should always set some ground rules for your meetings. And I always kind of say, well, we perhaps stopped doing that in meetings because we assume everybody knows how to behave in a meeting, and we all know how bad meetings end up sometimes. So I would argue, you know, that there's still good practice even in a meeting just to kind of clarify why we're here, clarify what's expected of the delegates. So the 4 house rules that I kind of put up, which is what I've already been talking about, is just behave like you would in a classroom. So be attentive, join in the conversations. You wouldn't in a classroom ignore every other person in the room. So again, you've got some other people who are sitting around you in the classroom, and I would expect you to have a conversation and talk, whether you do it to everybody in the chat or to kind of individuals. I would expect you to have that interaction. I will, again, in the classroom, I will talk to individuals and have some conversations. I will mention you by name. I also, from a timings perspective, as we've seen tonight, every time we start a new session, I go through and make sure everybody has got the audio and the visual. So we just need to make sure people are there on time. Again, very often we would open the session 15 minutes before we're due to start, and 90% of the people turn up 2 minutes before it's actually due to start, which means actually we end up starting 10 minutes late because we have to go through all of the kind of checks. Second house rule is actually to focus on the learning. So the idea of you've signed up for a virtual training is you're there to actually to learn something. And so we need you to be focused on that. So if you can shut your emails, turn off your WhatsApp notifications. So unless it's actively to do with the course, as we would expect you to do in the classroom, kind of move your phone away. You can do that at break times, because we would never sit all day in a classroom. We'd never sit on screen all day without having some kind of break. So if you can minimize your interactions, that's helpful. We do actually recognise as well, though people are human. I was delivering this morning and my lovely husband brought me in a cup of tea. Yes, we'll have doorbells going and we'll have dogs barking, and that's absolutely fine. But let's kind of give ourselves a fighting chance of actually kind of focusing as much as we can on what's happening on the course. I've mentioned this already in terms of being able to kind of communicate, see, they've got the dog's teeth in, to communicate clearly. Yes, and it does happen, and that's why we like to have chat open, because if you feel as though you're not getting some, your contribution is, at least you can put it in chat. I don't answer absolutely everything in chat. I expect you as delegates to keep an eye on the chat, and if somebody asks a question in chat that you can answer, then go ahead and answer it. Yes. So I don't mind that taking place as I would in a classroom. If it becomes completely distracting and everybody's starting to tell jokes in chat, I may have a conversation to be had. But typically, I would want you, if somebody says, has anybody got a good idea about, you know, kind of what we should do tomorrow? And that goes in the chat, then that's perfectly fine. Use your emoticons as well if you kind of do that, if you're really pleased with something. And again, you know, even when I'm going through this kind of slide, you can use your annotation too. So you've got some stamps there, so I think some people found them before. You can kind of put some stars, or if you kind of really agree with something, you know, quite happy, you put some kind of ticks and crosses. It doesn't spoil my presentation. I can get rid of them if I dislike them. So just kind of, I want you to feel part of the kind of delivery process, not just kind of the recipients on the other side of that. And the final thing is to remember that actually you've got other people, as I've already mentioned. You have other people, not just kind of some faces and some numbers, but there are other people that you can learn from. There will be people around in the group who've got more experience of you in certain aspects, but there will be people who look at you and think, well, I wish I knew what they knew in other certain aspects. So whenever you attend a training course, it's as much about kind of meeting some other people as it is about kind of learning from the trainer. And again, I want to make sure we encourage that as we go through a virtual classroom. So, anybody got any suggestions? Can I suggest you put them in chat first, and then we can kind of expand on that. Anybody got any other further suggestions that you would want if you were taking part of some virtual learning that you would expect yourself to do and other people in the class to do? Yeah. So you can start typing, or if anybody wants to unmute themselves, you're in control of your microphones. Anybody wants to contributions?
I would like
Mama.
to say that sometimes the chat function gets a little bit hard to keep track of when a lot of people are typing.
Okay.
I think
And
that's
I
a
suppose
challenge.
it's a similar thing in a classroom, though, isn't it? If everybody starts talking together, so it's about balance. And I think we're a lot more experienced in a classroom and in a meeting about knowing what that right level is. And I think it will take a while for people to start recognizing what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in chat in a virtual classroom. So sometimes there's some really kind of good discussions in the chat that I would actually start in the same way as I do in a classroom. If two delegates are having a really good discussion, I would want them to say, well, can we have that conversation out loud, because everybody else in the class can learn from that, and we're just kind of distracting talking at the same time.
Yeah, I just meant it's more challenging to keep in a live classroom. People would not actually talk over each other, just common sense. But in the chat, it's difficult not to type over each other, because you cannot really track what everybody wants to put as an input in the chat. So I think that's one thing that we have to get used to.
Yeah.
Or at
Right.
least control it in a way that maybe there's a moderator who handles the chat.
Yes. Actually, I wanted to, give a quick heads up here, right? By handling the chat, it's difficult, as you mentioned, Alberto, right? But there are other options, such as, and I don't know if you have seen on the rightmost part of the screen, below the participants, there are a couple of buttons, right? Like raise hands and such, right? That also gives the speaker the ability to define, okay, now who has some questions or etc., right? Open the discussion, the debate between the participants, and having, clicking the button of raise the hand, like I'm doing it, by the way, gives the chance or the visibility to the speaker in order to give, to pass the ball to someone between the participants.
Absolutely.
And also, besides that, I was actually writing on the chat. So basically setting the expectations before the call, right? It is great, not only at the beginning of the call, but before that one, right? Like we do on the meetings, we share some agendas, we share, what are the topics to be discussed. Also with the agenda, we can combine it with main ground rules, right? So everyone, knows in advance how to handle the entire virtual classroom.
And I think we, because the way we kind of preempt that, because I think we sent everybody out some joining instructions with the kind of the things. And I would expect, as you would attending, you would never just kind of turn up to a course without an understanding of the learning objectives. So we would do that. Anybody got anything else to add? No, I think okay. So let's just I always need to remember to clear all of it doesn't clear them when you kind of when you move on to the next slide. In terms of technology, then, just in terms of what we use, Zoom is our primary tool, and in that we will use some video and some audio, as we've already said. For the delegates, we would typically have a PowerPoint presentation, and we've already seen we'll use the chat. We are going to use the breakout rules, and again we would use the polls, but it would be a very poor trainer who only ever had a PowerPoint presentation when they were delivering the training. And so again, we would use a flip chart, we would use some other tools for some exercises. So again, what we try and do is we try to include some other technology. So we use Mentimeter, we use Miro for some whiteboards, and we also use Trello to just for some different ways of doing exercises rather than it being the same hour after hour. So we do kind of try and break that up. And again, if you come on one of the training courses, as part of your joining instructions, we will ask you to create logons into a number of these different technologies. Now, what we won't do is ask you to log on to anything that would incur any costs. So all of them have got kind of free basic access for you as a delegate, but it just means we can do something a little bit more interesting than just kind of doing the polls, and it allows us to kind of have a few more interesting times as we go through the course. So this is Mentimeter for those of you who've not seen Mentimeter. So either on your phone or on another screen, if you go to www.menti.com, so I'm expecting you to do this now on your phone, and type in, as you go to menti.com, it will ask you to type in a number. So if you type in 174133, that's in the top of that screen. It's just asking you the question, which of those technologies have you used before? And as you'll see, then we can get some dynamic answers on the screen. So again, this is kind of quite useful. Again, it gives you another tool to get some interaction, and it's good feedback for me as the trainer to get an understanding of kind of what some input is. So it's quite a nifty tool. So we've had 5 people who've responded so far. There's 6, and it's quite good because it's dynamic as well. So again, if I'm sitting there in the classroom, and this is virtual learning, I would expect all of the delegates to take part in that. So at the minute we've had 8. So again, that's not quite everybody. But again, if you're going to be a delegate, I would expect everybody to go through that kind of polling process. Okay. So that's just a sample of some of the technologies we use. So quite different from sitting on a webinar. Yes, which most of you will have kind of sat through and done. So any questions in terms of kind of that, kind of just how it's going to feel like being in a virtual classroom? Yeah. So we're trying to replicate as much as possible what it's like in a real classroom. So what I just want to do now is just give you a taster from the P3O course that we do. One of the things that we recognise is that if you're in the front of the classroom, you've got the trainer there who's kind of moving around and walking back and forward, create some kind of some energy. What you'll find on a virtual classroom is that the slides tends to be more animation, which if you're in a classroom just feels a bit kind of a waste of time. But when it comes to kind of virtual classroom, we tend to animate things more. Remember I said about speaking clearly, animate things more just to kind of keep the interest and keep us kind of focused on the screen. So in terms of the P3O syllabus, that has 6 different elements to that. What we're going to do is we're just going to kind of pick one bit from the section which is called Why Have a P3O. Now, the reason why this is a really important part of the text, because we are constantly get challenged in terms of, well, how do you add value as a PMO? What do you do for your organisation? Are you worth the money? Do you not think it would be easier if you weren't here telling us what to do? So a really important part of understanding what we should be doing as a PMO is recognising why the organisation wants us to have any kind of PMO in the first place. And a great tool that helps us understand that is something called the Business Change Governance and Enablement Model. Yes, you would think we'd get something with an easier name to say. So this is the overall model. I'm going to take you around what this model talks about, and then we're going to go off and we're going to use the Zoom rooms, the breakout rooms, to get you to do a little bit of work and simulate you doing an exercise as you would do in the classroom. So this model says there are various different elements that in a perfect world we would all do very quickly. Sorry, we'd all do very well. So the first thing that we would do in our organizations, we would choose to do the right projects and programs. And very often organizations are struggling because there are so many projects on the to-do list that they need some processes in place to start helping them identify which projects actually we should be doing within our organization. What information should we hold about those projects? How do we weight the information against those various projects? How do we understand what it's going to contribute to the organization to allow us to prioritize and resource the projects and programs we need to do in the organization? The second element we need to do is business change design. So this is not, it's talk about doing things in the right way. So we often hear about doing the right things and doing things right. This doing things in the right way is actually doing them in the right order and scheduling them in an appropriate way that's right for our organization. So when I worked for Cadbury Schweppes, we had 2 times of the year. One was around Christmas and one was around Easter, where we had to be very careful about what changes were being putting into the manufacturing parts of the organization because of the business cycles. Again, for organizations who do annual planning, we don't want every project starting on the 1st of January and then planning to finish on the 31st of December. So the whole sequencing bit might be a challenge for our particular organization. The third element we also need to do well as an organization is actually, if we're going to do a project, we need to do the project well. We need to make sure that we understand what the project's there to deliver. We need to understand how we deliver projects in our organization. So if this is a challenge for our particular organization, some of the things that we might do is to develop a project delivery framework, so standardizes and improves project management. It may also be allowed to develop the maturity in the organization. And the final element within this model is around, actually, well, we deliver lots of projects, but we don't necessarily seem to get any value. We don't ever seem to get the benefits that we talked about in the business case in our organization. So this, again, is a real challenge. And if it's a really good organization, yes, you only have one of these as a challenge, but realistically, lots of organizations have challenges in all of these different areas. And the final bit, again, this is where, from a PMO perspective, where we add some additional value, is about making sure that the information that's provided is actually validated and verified. So we make sure that we've got the right governance in place around those 4 different areas. So assuming we're all working in and around PMOs, what I'd like you to do is either to use the stamp feature in your annotation tools and tell me in your organizations what you think, which of those 4 dimensions is the one that kind of provides your organization with the biggest challenge. Yep, so we can have ticks. And we've got business change design. So it's interesting, you see, we've got smatterings around all 4 of those different areas. Very often, the ones that tend to come in most often, yes, or let me just, oh, I'm just trying to get this work. No, it's not working. This one here, in terms of the business change design, yes, is very, no, I like you. This business change delivery is very often where immature organizations start. They say, actually, we're doing an awful lot of projects, but we've got no way of no standard way of doing those projects. So we want to kind of get better at doing this. And then typically the next place they jump is over here to the top left-hand side, which is around, actually, we've got all of these projects now and we don't know, we haven't got enough time or money to do all of them. So which ones do we want to do? And then the next one is either doing business change design. And this is where often organizations start going from project management to program management. So they start recognizing that actually we can bundle projects together and deliver a strategic change as a program rather than a project. And the one that was on the too hard pile for a lot of the time was actually up here with the business change value, where we're actually starting to get benefits. Now, depending on your organization and depending on what the challenge is for your particular organization, depends on the products and services that you're actually, oh, there we go, that's slow, take that off, depends on the particular services that you're actually going to offer from your PMO. So what we're going to do is we're going to go off into some breakout groups. So they might only, well, actually what we might do is we might do 2 breakout groups because of the number of the people we've got on the call. And what I'd like you to do in your groups is I would like you to have a look at, for each of those dimensions, consider what services the PMO would offer. So if we're an organization where we have or we're not very good at delivering projects and we want to do the business change delivery, yes, what kind of services would we offer, and what services do our organization, our PMO, offer our organization now? Okay, so you can pick in your room whether you want to do business change strategy. So I shall write them in here so you know, because the chat will come into you. So you do business change strategy, which is about doing the right projects. Business change design, which is about sequencing them in the right way, grouping them into projects and programs. Business change delivery, which is about having the right kind of methods and processes, and also business change value. So you can pick one of those 4. Now, what you need to do when I put you into your breakout groups, you will need to pick somebody who is then going to use either PowerPoint, Word, or Excel. Share the screen. So hopefully you'll have somebody who's used the tool before. Share the screen and take a note, because I'm then going to ask you, as we would in a classroom, to come back and share it with the rest of the group. Okay. Right, then let me just do some quick changing around in terms of who's in the groups. Right then, are we happy? Do we know what we need to do in our exercise? Everybody's talking with their mute button on. Yes,
I think
we've got a few nods.
Yes.
So you'll get an invite on your screen that said you've been invited to join a breakout room, and what that will do is that will take you off with a subset of the delegates. There should be a button in there, so if you need me to come and give you a hand, I can come and give you a hand. But I'm expecting you to kind of spend about 10 minutes putting that together and have something to come back and share with the group. So, right, the rooms there, you should have your rooms available for you to go to now. Albert, are you going off into a room? There we go. ER, are you going off to, you should be going off into breakout room 2. Jerry, are you popping off into a room? Jerry, are you there? They've gone.
You're right.
Yes. Do you think I've told them enough time about they need to have their camera on?
You've got an echo. I can hear myself. Is that me or you? No, it might be me. I think it's worth you reading my guide just so you know the specific names of the tabs that some stuff is under. Because I feel like for people that are confused,
I don't help.
Not that you don't help, you do help because you know where it is, you just don't know what it's called.
Okay.
Like, it's not that you don't, you know what I mean? It's not like you don't know what it is and where it is. It's
How many pages is it?
It's 5, but 80% of it's pictures. In terms of actual text, it's probably only a couple of hundred, it's only probably a few hundred words.
Okay. No, I should have it printed out.
Yeah.
It's like I do this because I take notes. So like this morning, I took a note that what's his face, that Ben had audio issues. And what I'll do is I'll just kind of keep a track of that as I go through the day. I'm just going to have a quick pop in the rooms to make sure they're okay. I'll be back in a minute.
Yeah, that's fine. Conrad, is the door open? Can't hear me. Hello? I can't hear you. You're muted. You're muted. Muted.
When I go out into a breakout room, it stops sharing my screen.
What do you mean?
So you can't see the group exercise anymore, can you?
No, because you're not in the meeting.
I am.
Essentially.
Except so when I go in the other room, right? So I'm assuming, let me just go in the other room and just check they're okay as well.
Okay. You can always go into the room and share your screen so they can see it again. Muted again. It auto mutes when you join.
Right. They're happy playing.
Okay.
10 to 8. Time flies.
It does. Yeah. No, I think the only thing is this, like the specific names for where things are. So like when you say the like reactions and stuff, that's under a reactions tab for me, but then there's also the stuff in the participants that's more like aimed at you, if you know what I mean, than it is to everyone. So I don't know. It's just
Right, then I shall just give them a few minutes warning. Broadcaster, just say 1 more minute.
is Lindsay running the conversation in her room?
No, she's not actually. Simon's doing quite a bit of it.
Okay.
And funny enough, Bissy, after she didn't want to put a camera on, it's been quite pushy.
I mean, to be fair, if she's like sitting there with a face mask on in her pajamas, I can understand why. She just means
But you wouldn't turn up in a classroom like that.
I know, but
right then. So I need to kind of share my screen again. See it again?
yeah. Oh, what a nice diagram.
What?
Is it big enough? Do you want it bigger?
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's perfect.
I had to Google RGB for realistic skin tones. I don't think you understand. I was like, because the people who make them just like make that all their faces look the same, if you know what I mean. They all use exactly the same colour in, they're just slightly different faces.
No, can't have 4.
Asian faces.
Right, please. Right, final minute, please. Be prepared to share screen and work room session. I'm still not absolutely clear about, not absolutely happy about how we get them to find out what the what's happening in the
In the
exercise.
breakout rooms.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's worth using Trello for it.
Yes, because
Because
Trello allows you to put the instructions on the left-hand side.
So you could almost have not a separate Trello board, but even if you had like a tab on Trello for every day with
Yeah.
exercises, and then you could ask them to file their document under there, so then they all have access to each other's.
Yeah.
I don't think that's not a bad shout, I think.
No, there's some learnings we have to take from this, and that's a couple of the bits, but it's a needs must at the minute for next week.
Yeah, but I know, but like for next week, I know that we don't really want to like send them out a piece of paper, but even if at the start of the day on Trello you had exercises.
Yeah. Welcome back.
We got teleported.
You got, it's quite a great facility. But
Yeah.
and it's exactly as I say. What we're trying to do is try and replicate the fact that you've all gone off to a flip chart. Yes, and again, what we do for some of the exercises, we'd actually give you a template to complete, rather than you just have kind of some random exercise. But it's quite good for you because again, we would expect all of the delegates to take their turn in sharing their screen. I wouldn't want the same person to do it every exercise. So we would make sure that gets rotated around the group. So again, you're all getting some practice at kind of listening and collating what other people in the group are saying, but also then giving everybody the opportunity to kind of feed that back to the group, which we're going to do now. So who was sharing in breakout group 1?
Sorry. Do you
Alberto,
want to
that
lead,
was
Alberto,
you?
or it's okay if I lead it?
It was Alberto, I think you had it. Can you now share your screen so you can show us and the other group what you came up with?
Well, with the limited time we've had, I don't think we've completed much, but yeah, I can share my screen.
No. This is only a taster session, Alberta, so we're not marking you out of 10, but you may have had something useful in there anyway that people want to kind of find out about.
Well, I can't actually share my screen because you're currently sharing.
I'll pause my sharing. I'll stop sharing even, so you should be able to share yours now. Okay, there we go.
This is what we came up with. It was in Google Sheets.
Okay. Anybody want to take me through what each of those mean from a business change strategy?
That would be Manuel.
That was a volunteer
Democratically,
manual.
yep, that's it. So thank you. So in a nutshell, right, in order to deploy a strategy or to design this business change strategy, basically is how we will take it from point A to point B, right? That's what I understood, right? And what we did was to exchange some ideas. So the strategy is more aligned on first designing a governance management plan, right? Going through a business case modeling, and then the strategy is being aligned with all these factors, right? With the later stages of coaching on a strategy, adaptive alignment, and then doing consultancy on project handling, on change management strategies, right? Because even though we work on a portfolio, on a portfolio program, we have to take it even into the project itself as part of the change management, right? Because we go always from point A to point B.
So it's quite interesting what we talked about when we saw the overall model is that those services, in order to deliver the services at the strategic level, you will have to have a level of influence in your organization. Those are not things that a very junior member of staff or somebody new to the organization might be able to kind of just run off, which is why we said a lot of PMOs, when they kind of first come in, actually come in at business change delivery, and only when they start getting to deliver lots of projects well do people say, well, actually now we're delivering projects better, we're prepared to have a conversation now about doing the kind of the prioritization and the allocation of that. Excellent, thank you for sharing that, Alberto. So who was sharing their screen in breakout room 2? Thank you, Ken.
That was me. I will do that. Bear with. Can you see benefits?
Yes, we can.
Righto. Why can't I see the other thing? Sorry, bear with me. That's better. All right. So we looked at this from the perspective of the point in the
value.
Yeah, business change value, which as you said, was mostly talked about benefits. So that was the bit that we remembered, so hence benefits in the heading. So we looked at it from the perspective of the life cycle of the project, starting with assisting sponsors to write business cases to make sure that benefits are included in those business cases right from the beginning, to make it easier to monitor them as we go through. And if anyone in the group wants to chip in, then by all means do so as we're going along. If assistance has not been requested from the PMO for writing the business cases, then auditing the business cases to make sure those things are in there. Educating stakeholders in benefits management, so why it's a good thing to do, why we should do it, why it's important, and all that kind of stuff, and what it looks like. Throughout the delivery of the project, providing assurance at gate reviews and at steering committees to make sure that benefits are still relevant and they're being considered in things like change control and stuff like that. And then at the end of the project or after the end of the project, monitoring the delivery of benefits after the delivery in the sort of rollout phase or realization phase, or assisting the sponsors to do that if the organization doesn't want the PMO to get involved because it's deemed business as usual.
Excellent. So I'm going to put an extra tick on there. I'm impressed that you managed to get the bullet points actually annotated as animated as you go, Ken. So extra brownie points for that.
That's the advantage of being in group 2, you see.
Excellent.
A little bit of extra time.
Anybody want to add anything to that? Happy with that? Excellent. Right then, so if you can unshare your screen, I can go back to sharing mine. So you see, did that feel like a classroom would be in terms of going off to your flip chart and writing things on your flip chart? Yeah. So it's slightly different, and it still feels quite probably a bit clunkier than you would kind of feel in the classroom, but that's just because you're kind of more used to doing that. So you'll find if you come on a virtual training course, you will do a number of exercises. So we're not going to be spending the whole time kind of just watching your screen. And again, we're going to try and use a range of different kind of technologies and share that around the group. So it really matters that everybody who comes on the course is actually committed to contribute, because you will have identified people who've been in your part of the group where there's actually kind of been not necessarily people who don't necessarily kind of contribute. So I popped in both of those groups, so kind of everything went well. So you might not have learned a huge amount of from a P3O perspective, but hopefully I've introduced you to the business change, governance and enablement model. There to help you identify why your organization needs or wants a PMO, and therefore putting any services that from your PMO to address the problems that were raised. So conscious of the time, are there any kind of final questions? There should be a graphic in there that seems to have gone. Any final questions or contributions, whether that be about
All good from me.
model? Sorry, who was that?
It was Ken. I just said all good from me.
All good from you? Anybody got any other kind of questions or comments? Much appreciated. Yes, it is. It's 8 o'clock. If you want any more information, please get in touch. Otherwise, good to meet you all.